Now, to honor Wing Luke's career and legacy, his friends and family created the Wing Luke Memorial Foundation. Eventually, that foundation became the museum that we are today. Now, in addition to preserving Wing Luke's career, the foundation was established to fulfill his dream, which was to create a place that would preserve the history, culture, and arts of the Asian and the Pacific Islander community here today.
Is a changing neighborhood with a lot of different pressures.
A big and vibrant neighborhood, lots of living space, lots of people coming in and just cohabitating. With Chinatown, Japantown, there's an African American community that was where I-5 was, but because of the construction of I-5 and the incarceration, this area kind of dramatically decreased. And so now there's a lot of cultural preservation happening because these areas can't get any bigger, and so it's more like preserving what you have. What are some ways that we can still stay open? So if you look above the tiled roof in that kind of rectangle off-white thing, there's a little symbol in the center. So maybe yeah, it's the Masons. It's like a protractor. They have no affiliation with the Masons at all. You can't figure out what they just did. Just place it on, and they're still here today. So.
60% of the population is seniors. At least 50% live below the poverty level. And at least 50% are of limited English-speaking, self-identified limited English-speaking capabilities. So what that means is that the fair number of folks who live in the neighborhood are actually foreign-born. They immigrated here. The ID is still in many ways the first stop for a lot of recent immigrants who come to the U.S. looking for an affordable and accessible place to live. We have only really within the last 7 years started to develop family housing. If you do see families living in the neighborhood, some of the things that they're typically doing is moving into the SROs and occupying several SROs in a row. So grandpa may live in this one that's 10 by 10, and then mom and dad may live in this one that's 10 by 10, and then the kids may live in this one that's 10 by 10, which is not highly unusual. So part of our organization's mission is to help change that dynamic.
Before this, if you came here in 1975, this area was pretty much empty lots and mostly some light industrial, but no businesses at all, no residents that we know of. It had been actually derelict for over probably about 2 decades. In the early 80s, they were starting to open businesses. And then slowly, over a period of about 10, 15 years, there were more and more businesses, and there was a critical mass of businesses that came here so that you see what you have right now, which is about 100 or so businesses. When you consider trying to do community building in this neighborhood, that's a huge challenge because they hardly ever have time to actually step out of their shops. And even when you actually go and visit them, they're so busy or they're so worried about a million other things keeping their businesses going that they really don't have time to participate in the civic process. You have to really, first of all, approach it from the community building aspect because the population here are so burdened down with both language and cultural barriers that it's hard to actually get them to participate in that process. How will this affect the small businesses here as well as the whole community, which depends on these businesses to sort of keep this coherent cultural social fabric together? It's not just about doing business locally here. There's a connection with the old country.
So our alleys used to have apartments and storefronts. These all used to be storefronts. Somewhere along the line over the years, they The property owner for both of these buildings sold this building to the museum for renovation. And so they had to get buy-off from hundreds of shareholders in order to sell this building. This building is about 80% vacant up top, and the bottom half, the commercial level, is full. So that's actually something that's fairly typical of this neighborhood. You'll find that a lot of the historic buildings actually have a fair amount of vacancy up top and completely full on the commercial level for the historic buildings. And part of the reason for that is, if you think about it, they've probably owned the property for, 100 years. They have zero mortgage, right? So why do I need to spend millions of dollars to renovate my building to bring it up to code if I can actually just rent out the commercial level as is and make money that way? So now part of what will change is the rezoning that Kwong was talking about. With the Livable South Downtown Plan, it's actually putting a little bit of squeeze on property owners to rethink that mentality. Because essentially, you rezone this neighborhood, your property taxes are going to go up. If your property taxes are going to go up, it's much less likely that you can just sort of fly under the radar without necessarily renovating your building. Part of this vision was really thinking about, what does this neighborhood need? This neighborhood needs a place for its growing services. We had a clinic, which was outgrowing its space. We had an early childhood learning center, which was also outgrowing its space. We had a need for assisted living for seniors. We had a need for family housing. My gosh, the neighborhood was growing exponentially, and yet we didn't have the adequate resources to really make this a vibrant and livable place for people. So we re-envisioned this idea, we pulled the community together, and we started this planning process of thinking about how do we create a village square.
Within that town, they can kind of come and gather, socialize, help with cultural events, maybe help with employment. Now there's many ways to meet. There are community centers, schools, coffee shops, malls, movie theaters, you name it, internet. And so the youth don't really use it as much because they have other different ways to kind of meet.
So the thought was that, the seniors are sitting there in their cafeteria right there. They could look at the kids playing and have some of that intergenerational contact, which they do. Sometimes the kids come over and play, they make Valentine's Day cards together. Very cute.
We want to add more density to this neighborhood. We want to have more residents living here. Trying to integrate or at least place a park or some open space close by also. And speaking of open space, this street right here, King Street, is designated as a green street. So in the future, as development goes into here, I think there'll be a lot more investment to making it a much more pedestrian-friendly type of street. So, more trees and more pedestrian furniture and things of that nature.
You can pretty much get anywhere you need to go from the ID. It's the transit hub within the city of Seattle. I think we estimated that anywhere between 19 to 21,000 people come through the ID every day. That means either they get on or off in the ID for transit, some sort of transit reason. As much as we try to encourage people to use public transportation, people still love their cars. So there is an estimated, 10,000 cars that go through this neighborhood just on any given day, on a regular day. Just from an environmental justice standpoint, aside from the fact that we have a very low ratio of green space as compared to the other parts of the city, the other thing that I like to talk about is the fact that when you get into this garden, you can really tell how much it feels like the neighborhood has kind of been boxed in. We have one of the highest rates of respiratory illness in the whole city, 254% higher than any other neighborhood.
This actually is the oldest apartment building in Seattle. It will always be here, and that's part of the fabric of this neighborhood.